The wind isn't just a sound. It's a solid wall of noise, so loud it feels like it's trying to peel my skin off. Below me, the world is a children's playmat, a little patchwork of green and brown so far away it looks fake. My feet are just dangling in nothingness, 13,000 feet of empty air between me and the ground. The only thing keeping me from becoming a human lawn dart is a bunch of straps connecting me to a guy on my back, a guy whose name I just learned an hour ago. My heart isn't beating. It's a trapped bird trying to break out of my rib cage. Every single instinct in my body is screaming one thing: no. So that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. Honestly, I'm kind of wondering the same thing. But believe it or not, this whole mess started with a crippling fear of things that couldn't possibly hurt me, and a therapist who gave me some very direct advice. It all began with a phobia so strange, so completely consuming, that the only way to kill it was to find something much, much bigger to be scared of. To understand why I'm sitting in the open door of an airplane, you have to understand what used to send me into a full-blown panic. It wasn't heights. It wasn't spiders, snakes, or talking in front of a crowd. My phobia, the one that had its claws in me for as long as I can remember, was trypophobia, the fear of clusters of small, irregular holes. I know. It sounds ridiculous. And trust me, the logical part of my brain was right there with you, knowing it was absurd. But that's one of the most frustrating things about an irrational fear. You are completely aware of how silly it is, but you're totally powerless to stop the reaction. For me, it was a visceral, full-body nope. It would start with something simple: a picture of a lotus seed pod online. The way condensation forms a tight, bubbly pattern on a cold can, even a strawberry. The second my eyes locked onto that pattern, a switch would flip. This wasn't just you gross, it was a complete meltdown. First, my skin would crawl with an itch that felt like it was under my skin. Then the goosebumps, then the nausea, this lurch in my stomach that came with a cold sweat. My heart would race. My breathing would get all shallow and fast, and this wave of pure disgust and dread would just wash over me. It felt like I was looking at something diseased, something fundamentally wrong, even if it was just a piece of fruit. I've read theories that this might be some evolutionary leftover, an old instinct that connects those patterns with poisonous animals or skin diseases. Basically, on a primal level, my brain was screaming danger, while I was just trying to watch a nature documentary about bees. Living with it was like walking through a minefield of totally normal stuff. I'd have to scroll past pictures on social media with my eyes half closed. I once had to bolt from a cafe because the new wallpaper had this dotted pattern that made me dizzy. I couldn't cut a bell pepper if the seeds looked wrong. Sponges? Forget about it. It was exhausting and deeply embarrassing. It was this secret, weird vulnerability that I couldn't explain to anyone without sounding completely crazy. It wasn't just the triggers, it was the fear of the triggers. I was living with this low-level hum of anxiety, always scanning for patterns. It felt like a glitch in my own operating system that I just couldn't fix. This small, illogical fear was casting a giant shadow over my life, and I was desperate to drag it to the trash bin for good. I finally hit a point where I had to talk to a therapist. I walked in expecting the usual stuff: breathing exercises, maybe some light exposure therapy where I'd look at a picture of Swiss cheese for 5 seconds. I sat on her comfy couch and just spilled everything: the strawberries, the sponges, the panic attacks, the feeling of being hijacked by my own brain. She listened, nodding patiently. When I finally ran out of steam, she leaned forward. I braced myself for a prescription of mindfulness and meditation. "I see," she said, her voice totally calm. This trypophobia has power over you because your brain thinks it's a threat, even though you know it isn't. Exactly, I said, so relieved she got it. So, what's the plan? Well, she said, we could spend months, maybe years, slowly chipping away at it. She paused and looked me right in the eye. Or, you could prove to your brain that it's wrong about what a real threat looks like. I just stared at her. What do you mean? Your brain's alarm system is broken. It's like a smoke detector that goes off every time you make toast. It can't tell the difference between a minor problem and a real fire. So you need to show it a real fire. I must have had the most blank expression on my face because she broke it down for me. You need a bigger fear. A much bigger fear. Something genuinely terrifying that makes a fear of holes look completely insignificant. You need to face a legitimate, primal fear, survive it, and walk away. You do that, you might just reset the whole system. I was speechless. You want me to scare myself? I want you to overwhelm the faulty signal with a real one, she said. I want you to run at the biggest, loudest monster you can find. It's an intense kind of exposure therapy. By facing and beating a massive, real fear, you recalibrate your sense of what's actually worth being afraid of. I walked out of her office in a total daze. A bigger fear. The idea was completely insane. And also kind of brilliant. What was the absolute biggest fear I could think of? My mind went straight to it. Falling. That primal, gut-wrenching terror of falling from a great height. And just like that, an idea that was equal parts idiotic and genius took root. Skydiving. I was going to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Making the decision was one thing. Actually doing it was another. The minute I got home, I Googled skydiving near me. All these websites popped up with pictures of smiling, ecstatic people soaring through the sky. It looked like pure joy. To me, it felt like pure terror. My mouse hovered over the Book Now button for what felt like a lifetime. My palms were sweating. Sure, my phobia was about holes, but in that moment, my entire body felt like one giant goosebump. This wasn't some picture on the internet. This was a legally binding contract with gravity. I clicked it. The confirmation email popped up. It was done. I had a date with 13,000 feet. The next 2 weeks were basically a masterclass in psychological self-torture. I barely slept, and when I did, I had vivid dreams of falling. During the day, I was just a mess of anxiety. My brain used every quiet moment to play a highlight reel of worst-case scenarios. I watched video after video of first-time jumpers. Some screamed with joy, others just screamed. I tried to fight back. I'd sit in a quiet room, close my eyes, and visualize it all going perfectly. Me, calm in the plane. Me, smiling as I jumped. Me, landing softly, feeling like a hero. It mostly felt like I was lying to myself, but I kept at it. I practiced that 4-7-8 breathing thing. It would help for a minute or two, but the fear always came roaring back. Telling people was a whole other thing. My mom was convinced I'd finally lost my mind. My friends were split between, "You are a legend," and "Are you having a crisis?" The answer to that second one was, yes, I am. The morning of the jump, I woke up before my alarm. The world was so still, a huge contrast to the hurricane in my head. I forced down a light breakfast, knowing my stomach would probably want to return it later. The drive to the airfield was dead silent. No radio. Just me and my thoughts, which were all screaming at me to turn the car around. The drop zone was buzzing with activity. People in jumpsuits were laughing and high-fiving, packing parachutes like they were folding laundry. It was so casual it was both comforting and completely bizarre. This was their normal. For a few minutes it was about to be mine. After signing a waiver that listed about 1,000 different ways I could die, I got a safety briefing. It was simple. Arch your body like a banana in freefall and lift your legs for the landing. Then I met my instructor, Dave. He had the calm, sun-baked face of a guy who has jumped out of a plane over 5,000 times. He tightened my harness until I felt like I was being hugged by a very serious octopus, patiently answering all my nervous questions. He was the pro. All I had to do was not pass out. Then, we walked to the plane. A small, rattling thing that looked like it had seen some action. We all piled onto benches. The door was just a flimsy roll-up sheet of plastic. It closed, the plane lurched forward, and that was it. No turning back. The flight up was the worst part. 15 minutes of pure, uncut mental torture. With every foot we climbed, the world got smaller, and the reality of what I was doing got bigger. The hum of the engine was the soundtrack to my own dumb decision. I looked at the other first-timers. We all had the same look. Wide-eyed terror mixed with a heavy dose of, "What have I done?" Dave tapped my shoulder, shouting a final review over the engine. I just nodded. My mouth was too dry to speak. At 13,000 feet, the engine noise changed. A red light came on. The crew slid the door open and the wind just screamed into the cabin. It was violent, deafening. My heart, which was already pounding, somehow found a new gear. The light turned green. It was time. One by one, the jumpers ahead of me just vanished out the door into the blue. Then it was our turn. Dave scooted us to the edge. This was the nightmare moment. But the view was terrifyingly real. It wasn't a picture or a video. It was the actual sky, the actual ground, the actual wind trying to pull me out of the plane. Dave yelled, "Head back on my shoulder and just enjoy the ride." I put my head back. My body was shaking like a leaf. This was it. The absolute peak of fear. The real fire my therapist was talking about. And then, in one smooth motion, we were out. For one single, heart-stopping second, I felt that lurch of falling you get on a roller coaster. But just as fast, it was gone. It was replaced by something I never, ever expected. It wasn't falling. It was flying. The wind that was so terrifying in the plane was now a solid cushion of air holding me up. We hit terminal velocity, around 120 miles per hour, and the feeling was just pure, unfiltered freedom. I screamed, partly to remember to breathe, but it wasn't a scream of terror. It was a scream of pure shock and exhilaration. The sensory overload was complete. The rushing wind was white noise. But the view was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The world was just laid out below me like a map, and the fear, it was just gone. Wiped out by the sheer intensity of the moment. My brain didn't have room for it. It had been replaced by a fire hose of adrenaline and dopamine, a chemical cocktail of pure bliss. After about a minute that felt like a lifetime and a second all at once, Dave pulled the chute. There was a huge jolt upwards and then absolute silence. The roar was gone, replaced by this incredible peace. We were just floating, hanging between the sky and the earth. The change from total chaos to total calm was breathtaking. I could hear Dave talking, pointing out landmarks. I just laughed. A giddy, slightly unhinged laugh from someone who stared death in the face and found out it wasn't that big of a deal. The landing was soft. I lifted my legs like he said, and we slid into the grass. I just lay there for a second, staring up at the sky I'd just fallen through. I was on solid ground. I was alive. I did it. A wave of emotion hit me. Relief, pride, and this incredible sense of power. I felt like I had been rewired. The person who stood up was not the same person who got on that plane. I had faced the biggest fear I could imagine, and I won. In the days after the jump, something weird started happening. The world just felt different. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety I had lived with for years was gone. It was replaced by a quiet confidence. I mean, after you willingly throw yourself out of an airplane, an awkward conversation or a stressful day at work just doesn't hit the same. But the real test came about a week later. I was at a farmer's market and saw a vendor selling honey, complete with a big exposed honeycomb. A classic, grade A trigger. Normally, that sight would have sent a jolt of revulsion through me. My skin would crawl, my stomach would turn. I braced myself for it. I waited. And nothing. I just looked at the honeycomb. I saw the geometric pattern. I saw the honey. I saw an interesting piece of nature. I didn't see danger. I didn't feel disgust. That old mental pathway that screamed threat was silent. It was like the jump was a hard reset for my brain's fear center. I had shown my brain a real fire, and now it knew the difference. The fear of holes, which used to have so much power, now just seemed silly. It had no teeth anymore. And I guess that's the real lesson here. It's not just about phobias. It's about the stories our brains tell us and how much we believe them. For years, my brain told me a story about patterns and danger. By facing a much bigger fear, I didn't just beat the phobia. I learned how to question the storyteller. I learned that fear doesn't always have to be a stop sign. Sometimes it's a compass, pointing you toward the thing you need to do to grow. The feeling of power you get from facing a fear and walking away bleeds into every other part of your life. I'm not saying everyone should jump out of a plane. But I am saying that on the other side of our biggest fears is a version of ourselves we haven't met yet, stronger, calmer, and more capable. The cure for my phobia wasn't about the phobia at all. It was about discovering that I was bigger than what I was afraid of. So, I want to ask you, what's the fear that's holding you back? It doesn't have to be some crazy phobia. Maybe it's the fear of starting that business, or asking someone out, or just speaking your mind. We all have that thing that makes our heart beat a little faster. Let me know in the comments what fear you want to conquer. Your story might just be the thing that inspires someone else. Because if I can do this, you can absolutely face yours. Thanks for watching.